visit and learn from each other's archive, including the Guo-Qiang Foundation, the Easton Foundation, Jenny Holzer Studio, the Getty Research Institute, and others. As a young archive, relatively, those visits help us get a lay of land within this community and make something clear. There's no one standard in an artist's archive. Each archive is built around the artist's particular way of working and thinking, what they save, what they discard, and how they understand their own history. And when you trace those choices, you start to see the deeper questions behind them. What of an artist's practice is worth preserving? How can an archive capture the way thoughts develop over time? And ultimately, how does the archive shape the way we think about reality, memory, and history? These are big questions, and luckily, I don't have to answer them all by myself today. Other speakers will help us through them from different angles today. From my own position, working in the archive at Sci Studio, an independent artist archive, which is also a living archive, where the artist is continually creating new works and constantly drawing on his own records, I want to zoom in on something more practical. How does the archive participate in artistic creation? How does artistic creation in turn shape the archive that holds it? I hope these observations of me can offer an easy starting point for the broader conversation today and help open up how an artist archive acts and thinks from within. An artist archive holds a dual life. It follows the creation like a shadow, yet it also shapes how that creation will be remembered. It is in this delicate tension an archival thinking emerges, where preservation becomes a form of creation, memory turns into material. At Sci Studio, this thinking takes shape through an archival structure that has been evolving, adapting alongside with the artist's interdisciplinary practice. Since the archive was formally established in 2008, it has developed into a system of 16 major categories. These categories are what we consider our archival item types, a way of grouping materials by their function and medium, organizing in relation to artworks and projects. Alongside conservation and object files, which documents the treatment, condition, and provenance of each artwork after its completion, the archive also holds project files. It follows the project from its first idea to its realization, or sometimes unrealization. I have a photo taken from 2019. As you can see, a lot of these materials arrive already semi-organized, reflecting the basic archival habits and methods shared by the artist, his family, and the studio staff. We also keep ephemera from exhibitions, a bibliography of over 5,000 items, and extensive video and photographic records. And look at these numbers on the left. You can probably imagine our daily reality at Sci Studio. Each artwork leaves behind far more material than the moment we see it on the wall or the second it flashes in the sky. Built on a long arc of researching, collaboration and documentation, every project produces an archive that grows in a shape almost like an inverted pyramid. Artwork appears briefly, and the archival material that supports it accumulates steadily, sometimes box by box, year by year. You might be wondering, are we digitizing all of these? Yes, we are. Behind the scenes, preservation is really where everything begins. Physically, the materials are kept across several climate-controlled spaces. Digitally, we worked with this layered system, including the daily use servers which sync and back up to Dropbox as a workspace for ongoing projects, a dedicated archival server to save raw media, and a separate backup system that will eventually support collective access, an open source collection platform that we use to map our works, projects, and the context in a way a living archive can grow into. Collective access also will serve as the backend for our future catalog resume. Preservation however, is never a passive act. It really comes down to vigilance. Physical material demands attention, constant attention. They need stable temperature, humidity, protection from dust, mold, and even flooding on those rainy days. Digital records are just as fragile. Formats become obsolete, disks deteriorate, and there's always this risk of unauthorized use or loss. On average, we have to upgrade or refresh our storage system every 5 years, essentially extending the life of the archive on both technical and material level. So, why does Tai preserve all of this? Why commit to saving almost everything? The instinct to preserve has roots in his family, who have always had this deep respect for artistic creation and memory. For Tai, preservation is not about accumulation or storage. It is about holding the relationships with knowledge, material, and people that shape his practice. And because of that, the archive does not hold just finished project. It also captures how deep his research goes. For example, next to the mushroom project files, you will find enough notes and materials to make it look like he was briefly studying how to build an atomic bomb himself. Also, in his personal library as well, which is now part of the archive's responsibility. It is cataloged and arranged with the artist as its primary user. In the system, you can trace what was he reading, how he pairs ideas, and how those connections evolve over time. Similarly, we try to preserve the context of archival material. Things such as the photo names and structures used by former staff are important records because they reveal how people at the time understood the artist's work. Preservation is also generative. In a living archive, ideas do not simply just get stored. They pause, resurface, and grow with the artist. The archives keep them reachable, so he can recognize what still speaks to him and what has taken on a different shape. For example, his 2002 proposal for Central Pompidou was stopped by safety and permission constraints, but the idea didn't disappear. More than 20 years later, when the museum began planning its 2025 closing ceremony, the proposal resurfaced. One of its original scenes finally found its moment, and it was adapted for new context. The archive allows ideas to re-enter when conditions, technology, or opportunity aligns. You see this same continuity in the long development of Bigfoot's footprints. The earliest sketch from the early 90s imagined 200 footprints crossing European borders at a high speed, a reflection of Tai's own lived experience navigating visas and working internationally. Later iterations from Tai's time living in Japan show a figure walking towards the Pacific Ocean, since Japan does not share any borders with another country. The idea then traveled with him to Washington, D.C., Central Park in New York, and Taymont in London before finally being realized in 2008 for Beijing Olympics opening ceremony as footprints of history. By preserving the unrealized, the archive reviews how an idea persists across geography, politics, and time. It makes visible the gap between the original intention and realization. You can see what questions have stayed with the artist, the shifts in his decisions, and how certain trajectory carry forward. There's another key component of our archival system that I want to highlight here before ending today's presentation. Language. It is important because it shapes how the archive is interpreted. In a multilingual studio like ours, while the artist works mainly in Chinese, sometimes Japanese, our records are maintained in both Chinese and English. Translation then becomes part of the archival process, and translation is never neutral. In this example, this work was once labeled as a test, in line with our usual vocabulary for material experimentation. But when we revisited this piece with the artist while preparing it for exhibition last year, he clarified that the work had been made in the context of a specific project while It was studying the local gunpowder, how they behave differently from that of other countries. So while we aim to keep the control vocabulary consistent and stabilized, our priority is simple: to maintain the clarity while allow the artist's thinking to guide how the work is described and preserved. At the same time, there are cases where we do need our new terms. We developed gunpowder painting, gunpowder drawing, anchored in the Getty Research Institute Art and Architecture Thesaurus, but we tried to avoid hybrid expressions that would drift beyond this shared scholarly framework. In this way, the archive can remain open, legible, and connected to a larger research ecosystem. Another language system in the archive is our keyword list. This is something we have built over many years of research. It began as a practical response to our most frequent user of our archive. When creating new works, Tsai often asked to retrace these earlier steps. Could you find all the works related to birds? Next time, show me everything that mentions seagulls. To support him, the team started to tag in both the imagery and the concept connected to each project. And from this early pool of over 800 things, Dr. Rico Tomi later developed a 99 project keywords for Tsai's exhibition, Odyssey and Homecoming, at Beijing Palace Museum in 2020. It was paired with the exhibition chronology in the catalog to help readers to get a sense to better understand the arc and inner logic of Tsai's practice from 1980s to 2020. As his practice continued to evolve, including his recent shift into AI, this vocabulary also became the foundation of AI Tsai, the cosmic model developed by Tsai Guo-Qiang and his team based on his archive. And this is where the rigor of these keywords become essential because they were grounded in research and aligned with Tsai's own logic. They became a strong data set for training the model. And when the archive staff trained the AI, we fed it with images, text, audio, and video from key projects, distilled through the structure of the keyword system. The archive here became not only the source of material, but the logic that connects it. One example of this in practice is the case behind me. In 2023, Tsai shared a sketch about extraterrestrial bases he created in 1991 with AI. Because the concept of extraterrestrial has already been tagged in the archive through the keyword system, the AI was able to locate it and enter into a dialogue with the artist at the pretty much similar level. By the time, we had moved from the first to second generation of AI. AI had eyes, its camera. It could record video and generate images. So when Tsai was creating the gunpowder drawing, the AI responded in real time with its camera and offering visual feedback. And this is the final creation inspired by their conversation. With Blaster, the gunpowder painter AI Tsai, the process deepened. Blaster was trained on years of Tsai's gunpowder data, processed videos, and completely works from the archival database. Over time, it developed not just the technique, but a sense of how a gunpowder drawing might look and feel. If you ask Blaster, what do you want to draw today? It can offer an idea, explain the concept, and outline the steps. It suggests where to put the gunpowder, how coarse the gunpowder should be, and suggests the robotic arms or laser cutters to carry out more precise actions. And this is where the complicity emerges. The archive now has determined how to archive these proposals, which ideas came from AI, which were guided by the artist, and how do we capture the moment when they inspire, provoke, or correct each other, and ultimately, when a work is created jointly by artist, AI, and the robot. Is AI a tool, a collaborator, or an artist in its own right? Perhaps the living archive exists precisely in the space between art and record, preservation and change. It is alive not simply because it exists, but because it it is used by artists and researchers. This vitality, of course, produces tension. For the artist, the archive is both support and constraint. It allows the past to remain accessible, but also makes it difficult to step away from it. And for us, the question then becomes, how do we sustain this vitality without reducing life to record? And when almost everything can be preserved, what's beyond the reach of archive? I would like to pause here and hope that today's symposium may help us think through these questions together. Thank you.
So what exactly is archival thinking? What is an archive? What does it contain, and how is it created? And more importantly, how does it shape the understanding of an artist's legacy? What role does it play in understanding art history? And whose story gets to be told? Why do so many artists turn to archives as a source of inspiration and knowledge? And these are just some of the questions we'll aim to explore today. This gathering together brings artists and archives into conversation to examine the value, function, and creative potential of archives. And an archive is broadly defined as a collection of information. It encompasses exhibition files, correspondence, photographs, sketchbooks, diaries, address books, business records, receipts, tax documents, and now digital content such as emails and files. It is a mix of the everyday and occasionally a spark of the extraordinary. Essentially, an artist's archive is any documentation related to their work and process. Once considered peripheral, now such materials are recognized as vital to art history, revealing an artist's motivations, methods, and evolution. And creating an archive is an ongoing process, one that benefits from foresight and organization. It's best to preserve more rather than less. What seems insignificant today may be of great scholarly interest in the future. And a well-maintained and accessible archive enhances scholarly engagement, increases visibility, and shapes the long-term legacy of an artist. And the archive provides a narrative of an artist's life. And I think that'll be one of the core ideas that we'll keep coming back to today. And I began my career working with artists and their collections before I even understood what an archive actually consisted of, taking on the job without any formal training. And that is not so unusual. Studio managers take care of the everyday, while artists are focused on the making of the work. But over the years, I've come to realize that I approach all of my work with the instincts of an archivist. And today I'm going to outline my trajectory from cataloging artist collections, to building an archive from the ground up, to conducting research that reframes art historical narratives, to helping artists and scholars generate new work from existing archival material. So we're going to go way back machine now. When I was in college at the University of Colorado at Boulder, I became aware of Naropa Institute, a Buddhist school with a writing program that was called the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. And it was started by Allen Ginsberg and Anne Waldman. And that was where I first met Allen Ginsberg. And I eventually became Allen's teaching assistant. And every summer I was assigned to help him with a myriad of duties. The job expanded, and I eventually moved to New York, working for Allen for almost 10 years until his passing. And this was my first experience seeing a well-run office supporting an active literary career with a secretary, an archivist, and office assistants. And working with Allen also introduced me to the idea that archives are not passive, they're shaped by intentionality. And in addition to being a central figure in the Beat generation and a groundbreaking American poet, writer, and activist, Allen became a supporter of many aspiring poets and artists. And early on, Ginsberg understood the importance of the archival record. The poet Ed Sanders called him, quote, the first Jack the Clipper that I ever met. In that when he was a teenager, he would amass big files of news clippings on Hitler, Mussolini, and the Spanish Civil War. David Margolick, writing in the New York Times, said, quote, for much of his 68 years, Mr. Ginsberg has been a pack rat. He began keeping a journal when he was 12, and as he came to believe his life embodied the struggle for sexual, social, and political liberation in the 1950s and 60s, he was soon saving everything. The compulsive collecting took on a new urgency in the Vietnam era as he saw counter-revolution and oppression approaching. And Margolick was writing in September of 1994 in the context of the sale, accomplished that year, of Allen's voluminous, over 300,000 items archived to Stanford University. Quote, Mr. Ginsberg's personal archives, journals, tapes, letters, poems in progress, newspaper and beard clippings, even dried up pieces of hallucinogenic vines and a pair of old tennis shoes will land at a place the Beats bypassed, a place so ex-urban it is called the Farm, balmy, palmy Stanford University. And it was through Allen that I encountered someone whose archival footprint was both vast and precarious, Harry Smith. One year, as the Naropa summer season was about to begin, he casually mentioned that he was bringing Harry Smith with him to Boulder to teach for the summer. Only later did I realize that he actually had an ulterior motive. Under advice from his psychiatrist, he was planning to leave Harry in Boulder, as Harry was living in his Lower East Side apartment and driving him crazy. And for those of you who don't know Harry Smith was a bohemian figure, often associated with the Beat movement and the New York Underground. He was a painter, filmmaker, musicologist, anthropologist, occultist, and linguist. Most well known for his significant contributions to America's cultural heritage with his groundbreaking research into American folk music. Smith amassed thousands of 78 RPM records from the 1920s and 30s that ultimately became the Anthology of American Folk Music. Released in 1952 on Smithsonian Folkways Records, this 6-record LP set is credited with initiating the folk revival of the 1950s and 60s. But he was also equally well known for his experimental avant-garde films, creating hand-painted batik animations, one frame at a time. He also developed ingenious collage techniques and worked with a variety of film genres. And collecting was at the heart of his many projects. 78 RPM records, books, Ukrainian Easter eggs, paper airplanes that he found on the street, seminal textiles, tarot cards, and string figures. In his cosmological worldview, everything was connected across cultural lines. But preservation, however, was not his strength. And I met Harry Smith on the 4th of July as he strolled gallantly across the lawn of Naropa Institute in a trench coat, smoking Salem 100s and holding a Sony Pro DAT Walkman and microphone, recording the sounds of the summer picnic, culminating later that evening in a crescendo of fireworks. And I had first heard about Harry Smith from my professor, Stan Brackage, the noted avant-garde filmmaker, in our film history class. And he would speak about him in histrionic tones. But on this day, on the 4th of July, our relationship was sealed. I became Harry's secretary and assistant until his passing in 1991. Living hand to mouth his entire life, he died penniless in a small room at the Chelsea Hotel, What remained of his life's possessions were a small number of things in his room at the Chelsea and his small apartment at Naropa Institute. But as a consummate collector, he was smart enough to strategically place boxes of things over the years at Anthology Film Archives, Ginsberg's apartment, and any friend or associate who had some room to spare. And after Smith's passing, the job of piecing these collections together became my pursuit for the next 25 years. And really the challenge became, how do you reconstruct an archive from fragments? And I have to give credit to Allen Ginsberg, who actually funded my archival training at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., where I learned about conservation, preservation, and collection management standards and best practices in the field. And it took about 20 years to put together what eventually became the Harry Smith Papers. It was akin to an archaeological dig, a lot of detective work, and following up on the eclectic strands that Smith had delved into during his life. We reissued the anthology on CD, which ended up winning 3 Grammy Awards, and made his films available on DVD, staging several film screenings, public programs, and concerts. In 2001, I received an auspicious phone call from the art historian Tom Crow, who's now at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU, and he was about to begin his tenure as the director of the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles. And he was asking me if I was interested in coming to the Getty as a scholar based on my work on Harry Smith. And my first question was, okay, when can I start? It was really the first opportunity that I had to work in a supportive environment on Harry Smith materials. And it was really a perfect union. We ended the year with a 2-day symposium on Harry Smith, and we followed it up on the next year with an additional symposium based on his film Mahogany. And a few years later, the first scholarly publication on Smith. And the GRI eventually acquired the Harry Smith Papers, where they're now housed in special collections. And the materials are a unique combination of Smith's personal belongings, but also primary source documentation that we had amassed over the years researching Smith's life's work. And it's really been gratifying to see how the collection at the Getty is used for all sorts of projects, including for John Zwed, the author of Cosmic Scholar, the recent biography on Smith. And artists such as Sharon Lockhart and James Benning came and they created facsimiles from Harry Smith's paper airplanes. The musician Devendra Banhart has used the materials as source material for multiple projects. And the GRI was a major source for a survey retrospective exhibition for the Whitney Museum in 2023. And Smith's books and records are held at the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they're actually planning an exhibition in 2027 on the anthology of American folk music. So you can see that archives and collections go on to have multiple lives. And none of these projects would have been possible without the deep commitment of people dedicated to tracking the trail of his recordings, films, and collections. And Harry Smith could easily have been an artist who was left in the dustbin of history and forgotten. When I was at the Getty, one of my main projects was Pacific Standard Time. And that actually began as modern art in Los Angeles. And it was a research initiative that focused on the contributions of contemporary artists, curators, critics, and collectors in Los Angeles during the post-war period. The effort was motivated by the fact that many artists from the era were aging and there was a lack of scholarly resources on the subject. And the project really started from the ground up, delving into all aspects of the period. We conducted a series of oral histories to capture the voices of people who were first-hand witnesses to the LA art scene, in tandem with a small grants to institutions across the city to catalog their holdings. And the GRI started to acquire the archives of Los Angeles key artists, collectors, dealers, filmmakers, and critics. Emphasis was also placed on public programs as we began a series of lectures, screenings, symposia, and panel discussions. In trying to set the historical record straight, we realized that the LA art scene was not just diverse, but thriving. Over 7 years of research, the project continued to grow, culminating in over 68 museum shows and 100 gallery exhibitions in the Southern California area. And PST had a significant impact by elevating the research and visibility of Southern California art, fostering new scholarship as it showcased the region's instrumental role in American art history. While at the GRI, I worked on a handful of archival projects that illustrate how archives can be used in unexpected ways. Ed Ruscha's Streets of Los Angeles. In 2012, the Getty Research Institute acquired 5 decades of Ruscha's photographic project that documented the streets of LA, over 1 million items, including negatives, digital files, contact sheets, and notebooks.
In 1966, Ed Ruscha mounted a motorized camera to the back of a pickup truck and photographed every building on the Sunset Strip. Returning again and again to Sunset Boulevard and various other Los Angeles streets, Ruscha has continued to document the cityscape for nearly 60 years. The Getty has digitized 120,000 negatives of the more than 750,000 images. A portion of these images were then tagged with AI image recognition to explore online. The resulting archive is an invaluable resource for scholars from a wide variety of disciplines that want to glimpse the major boulevards of Los Angeles evolving over time.
So you can see that at the Getty, for that Ruscha project, they really worked to extract information and meaning from the archive to provide a publicly available resource to researchers of history, art, architecture, and to allow for like a richer contextualization of this seminal artist's work. The GRI also had a series of visiting artist program in accordance with the Scholar Residential Program, and there's a related theme each year, and in 2010, the German artist Thomas Demond encountered the LA architect John Lautner's fragile, rarely seen cardboard maquettes of unmade projects as a visiting scholar. His subsequent photographs of the California's architects' models, printed in his book Model Studies, exemplify how an artist can tap into an archive to create an entirely new body of work. Tacita Dean was the artist in residence in 2014, and while there, she proposed that chance be her guide through special collections, and indeed it was. She researched randomly, meandering through boxes, objects, and images from sources as varied as medieval alchemy books to 20th century artist letters. Monet Hates Me was a portfolio of mixed media objects that traces Dean's chance encounters in the vast art historical archives at the GRI. After about 18 years at the Getty, I transitioned to work at Guo-Qiang Gallery, where I developed Building a Legacy initiative. My work focused on working directly with artists on their archival, conservation, and preservation practices. I helped with estate, nonprofit, and foundation creation and archive placement. The ultimate goal, stewarding an artist's market and creative legacy. And since leaving Guo-Qiang, I've been working with artists and estates such as Ed Ruscha, Larry Bell, Peter Alexander, and for the past 3.5 years, the Agnes Varda estate in Paris. And tapping into her archives has been the source material for several recent exhibitions, including at the Instituto Morelia Salles in Brazil, which opened last week. And it was a show that showcased about 200 photographs taken by Varda throughout the 50s and 60s, presented in dialogue with her cinematic work. And currently I'm working with the Joe Good Studio, a Los Angeles artist who passed away in March of this year, helping with the transition from being a working studio into an estate. And I supplemented that recently with receiving my art appraisal certification. So I've been starting to do appraisals, and that really feeds into the understanding of working with archives and estates. And really, I hope that all the projects that I've outlined for you today began, I think with me personally, a desire to work alongside artists, artists in particular that I admired. And over time, I realized just how preservation and presentation can ensure that creative work can remain accessible for future generations. So thank you so much. And our next session will be a panel in which we'll hear case studies about some of these ideas and get into them further. And I hope too, if you have questions, please we'll save ample time during our panel to be able to discuss some of these ideas. So thank you so much.